Welcome to Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Our show today deals with Prell, the Pacific Resources for Education and Learning, and we're calling it Transforming Pacific Education. Joining us today is the President and CEO of Prell, Ms. Nicole Forrester. She has a very, very diverse background. She served with the Australian Ministry of Foreign Affairs at one time, and indeed was a consular office at the Australian Consulate in Los Angeles. More recently, she headed up the Young Leaders Program at Pacific Forum, and she has won several awards for her leadership. She has an abundance of experience in dealing with diverse cultures, and I'm sure that's what led her into her position with Prell. Welcome to Asia in Review.
Thanks so much, Bill.
It's great to have you.
It's great to be here.
Well, tell us about Prell. What's Prell all about? What's it do? What's its mission? What's its purpose in life?
Thank you. That's a great question to start off with. Prell started in 1990 when the US Department of Education recognized that they needed somebody who was based in the Pacific to help them with their mission to improve educational outcomes for Pacific Island children. So we started a nonprofit, which really was fully funded by the US federal government to help work with education systems. So really working with the departments of education and the ministries of education in what's known as the US affiliated Pacific Islands.
Which would be Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Guam. I'm missing somebody here.
Sure. Let me fill in the others for you. So if you start in Palau and work your way across the Pacific back to Honolulu, so you have Palau, you have each of the federated states of Micronesia, which is Yap, Pohnpei, Chuuk, Koshrai, then up to Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, and then over to the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and then dip down into American Samoa, and then back up to Hawaii.
Okay, we got them covered then.
Yeah. So with that mission that the US Department of Education gave us, we started out very much focused on the education systems themselves. Not so much what we do right now, which has grown over the last 25 years to not just consider what we think of as upstream education settings.
These education systems, these were essentially set up by the US in kind of a colonial manner.
Yes, I think that is a accurate way to describe them. So after
actually, could say like a lot of Hawaii's public education system was set up in a similar semi-colonial fashion.
Yeah, I guess one good way to illustrate that is the type of textbooks and teaching techniques and strategies that were used across the region for a long period of time really reflected in particular East Coast priorities. And one of my favorite examples is a science text that was used in the islands, which was teaching children about squirrels and chestnut trees. Now, I don't know anywhere in the islands that we work in and that we live in that have those things. So you're right that there perhaps was a very great influence from Washington.
The suspicious side of me says that systems set up in such a manner usually have the goal to sort of cultivate the allegiance of the students to the metropolitan power. Does that sound like it makes any kind of sense?
It does make sense, and I don't know if it was as conscious as that. I think it was more that the US Department of Education knew that the students in the Pacific weren't performing as well as what they'd hoped and weren't performing as well as their mainland counterparts, and they did what they knew how to do on the mainland. So what was missing in that picture, and what Prell has really come into its fore in the last 5 years in particular, is designing strategies that work for island communities. And really taking what we call a place-based approach to the education strategies, that we work with not just the education that we know of on the mainland, but we know what works in the islands. And that means we have to incorporate things like Indigenous knowledges and in local environmental knowledge alongside the curriculum that comes often set by the USED.
Now, when we're talking about curriculums, we're talking about any curriculum from what, elementary school through high school?
We actually work from K through to 14, so community college.
Community colleges?
Yes, we do.
I see.
Yep.
And I suppose all these, like the Marshalls and all these other places we mentioned, all have their own community colleges.
They do, actually. So there's a strong community college network across the region, which is great. It gives children from the Pacific an opportunity to continue their education at home, but it's also connected to our great University of Hawaii, and a lot of students will go through the community system in the islands and then come here to continue their education to a bachelor's degree.
So it's fairly easy for them to transfer once they've completed community college education and wherever they might come from?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word easy. Unfortunately, there's still some significant barriers, and those barriers apply not only to students coming from other islands, but to students here in our islands themselves.
That's true as well. Wow, that's interesting. I like your motto, enhancing community well-being through partnerships and education. I think that's really right on.
Thank you. It took us, I think, a little time to get to that point. We were very much focused on the education part of our mission earlier on, but now we see that it's a more holistic approach that we need to take, that through the mechanism of education, we're actually building more sustainable places in the islands, here in Hawaii and in the region, for children to grow and thrive. To do that,
now, when you say you're building more sustainable places, you're talking about more creating more sustainable communities through education. In other words, lifting up the general level of quality of life.
Yeah, and the way to do that is to make sure that people have places where they can grow and thrive locally while also having global knowledge so that they can prosper in this connected world that we live in today.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. I'll tell you what, let's, can we put up that map of the area so just to kind of focus everybody in here? There we go. There's the area. And I think that'll help everybody out. I mean, it's a very diverse area.
It's incredibly diverse. So if you look at this area that we work in, there's over 2 million people living in this area when you include Hawaii. There's over 2,000 islands in these places. And you have hundreds of languages and cultures. So they are quite diverse, but at the same time, island communities in the Pacific share many challenges and many strengths. And so what we do at Prell is we help communities identify what their strengths are as a way to help them close or amplify their strengths so that they can be where they want to be rather than where they are.
It's a real challenge. There's so many islands, and all pretty small, and the population is small to start with, and yet it's so scattered. It's a huge challenge, isn't it?
It is. I think when we look at what we know about living in island communities, and we honour that knowledge, and then we apply what we know from living in metropolises that we do now, that when you put those two knowledges side by side, we can live better in the islands. I think one of the challenges that we've had is somewhere along the way in the 20th century, we kind of forgotten some of those things that we knew about how to live sustainably in the islands. Things like local food production is something that we feel very distinctly about here in Hawaii. We import 90% of our consumables here. And so we've forgotten some of the things we knew about how living here without bringing as many things from the outside.
What intrigued you about this job? Why did you want this job? Because you're fairly new in it.
I am. I haven't even been there for 6 months yet. This job allowed me to pull together all of the threads from my previous work into one job. So I started out in Indigenous education and community development at the Queensland University of Technology as an associate lecturer. Then I went to the Foreign Service. Then I worked in the Pacific in a leadership capacity. And so the combination of Pacific nations, Indigenous and community development, education through a leadership aspect, I thought, wow, this role really gives me an opportunity to pull all of those things together and really take my career to the next step while serving the communities that I care about.
Is there something in your own particular background that drew you to this type of work?
I am the granddaughter of a Wiradjuri woman, and so I think that that's always drawn me to the strengths that communities have, and in particular Indigenous communities sometimes don't recognise their own strengths. So I'm privileged to be able to work in an environment that helps them recognise those strengths and harness them.
Interesting. Interesting. So now, okay, your headquarters is here in Honolulu, But where do you have offices in the area?
So we have offices across the area that we serve. So starting again in Palau, we have an office there. We also have offices in Guam, which services both the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas and the island of Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia. And we have offices in Pohnpei, in Kashrai, in Chuuk, and in the Marshall Islands as well, in Majuro. So we look after and we work with American Samoa from here in Honolulu.
And these offices, these are all staffed by Indigenous people in whatever particular community this happens to be. How big are the offices? Typically, it's again 3 people, 4 people, 5
Actually,
people?
a little bit smaller than that, 1 or 2.
1 or 2?
Most of them are 2. It really does depend on what we're doing in that place at that specific time. One of the beauties about the model that we use of community development is that Prell is not the expert that flies in and flies out and tells people how to do their community education programs. What we do is that we work with the communities through our local staff, and then we supplement that with technical expertise when needed. So what makes that work is that we actually partner with communities on the ground every day.
How do you partner? How do you go about working with these communities and not just sort of sweeping in there on your galloping white stallion, say we've come here to save you, sort of with a kind of a missionary zeal, which just doesn't work anymore in anything like this. How do you interface with a local community? How do you partner with them? How do you do that?
So we have a model which are called professional learning communities, and it's our key way of engaging lots of different stakeholders from one place around one issue. So for example, we have a program called the Pacific Islands Climate Education Program. It's helping communities in the Pacific understand how their islands are changing because of climate and how to adapt to that. So with these professional learning communities, we bring in teachers, but also Indigenous elders, but also the local government, but also the US federal government agencies who have, for example, in a particular place, an office.
For example?
For example, NOAA.
Oh, okay.
In American Samoa.
Sure.
So we work very closely with them around one of our science programs that we do down there. And so Prell, as the office, the staff in the office, brings together, we act as a facilitator, we're just a bowl for all of the local expertise and bringing them together around the single issue. And we co-create, so we don't come in with a solution. So,
okay, so we have problem X, we think needs attention. So we have like a conference or a meeting, and we call in educators or maybe politicians or government officials or community leaders of various kinds.
Yes.
And just it's through a policy, through an approach based on discussion.
Yeah.
We have this problem where we would need to solve. What are your folks' ideas about it? Let's get some sort of an eclectic approach together.
Exactly.
Is this the idea?
It is. We use collective action because we find in the islands the only way to sustain change is if the change comes from within the place.
Good point.
External solutions that are pre-decided by an organisation and their funders before they arrive.
That's colonial.
Well, and besides that, they won't work.
Yeah.
And as soon as the project's over and the staff leave, then you'll go back to the way of being before.
And I can see in something like this, you really have to keep in mind local sensitivities. And this is the one way, I think, of diluting those sensitivities, addressing those sensitivities in a way that would allow the project to go forward.
And if anything, it's harnessing those sensitivities. Sometimes when people...
harnessing, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, sometimes when people think about working in the islands, and here in Hawaii as well, they think about the challenges and not the strengths. And so what we do is we always come from what's called an assets-based perspective. How do we help the community identify what the resources they already have towards making a solution?
Good. Let's stop here. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and we'll pick that up. You're watching Asia in Review. My guest today is Nicole Forrester. She's the president and CEO of Prell, a great organization which is doing some really good work in the South Pacific, and we'll be right back.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island in the ER position. Every other Tuesday, I get to host a show here on the ThinkTech program about healthcare. We call it Healthcare in Hawaii. It's really enjoyable for me to bring other healthcare leaders from around the state to talk about our pressing issues. Hawaii has long been the health state, but we need to keep up the momentum, the inertia, and with your help and with your participation, we can come and share all of the big issues that are pressing day to day. Thanks for joining us every Tuesday, alternating weeks from 2 to 2:45.
Welcome back to Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Nicole Forrester. She's the president and CEO of Prell, Pacific Resources for Education and Learning. And we've been talking about the organization's mission, its focus on the South Pacific, and some of the things that it hopes to achieve there. Well, just as before the break, we talked about the network of offices that Prell has across the area. And so, of course, we have to find out about this. What's the budget?
The budget is very small compared to how big the area of service is. So the area that we look after is bigger than the continental US.
Mm-hmm.
And as you may know, there's a airline that services most of the region, and so it's not the same flying from Honolulu.
Which airline is that?
That's now it's United.
Okay.
And Hawaiian
Used to be Continental.
Used to be Continental,
Okay.
and Hawaiian going to American Samoa.
Okay.
So we have long distances to travel, but we offset that travel cost by utilizing local staff who are highly trained and experts in their own fields to run our offices in the region. And we have quite a few staff here in Honolulu. So we do a lot of work in the state of Hawaii as well, which I don't know that people know us for.
You know, I think that's probably true. And everyone out there, this is your opportunity to become far more familiar with Prell than perhaps you were before. Do you get any help with the military of flying supplies out there?
No, we don't. But the military are doing great work. The US military are doing great work in the region and have been very supportive of places that have had extreme weather events. So, for example, most recently, Chuk and Yap were quite badly affected by Typhoon Maisak. So I know that from the contacts that we have in the community that the military have been there on the ground. We don't move a lot of things because for the most part we're a knowledge-based organization. So we're moving ideas, but not as many resources. We do books.
I was thinking there must be books involved.
There are books, yes, and we try and reduce the amount of things that we're moving because we're conscious about our footprint. So we're not just conscious about moving people unnecessarily, but we're also conscious about moving resources. So where we can, we print locally.
Locally means in the islands?
If we can, yeah.
Okay.
So for example, we're hosting a conference at the end of July for the Pacific educators in Majuro, and we'll print locally.
Interesting. Do you get into computerization of classrooms and that sort of thing?
We definitely use technology in the work that we do because it's one way that we can make our meager budget go a little bit further. So what we find is that there are some challenges to that in the region in particular. Here in Hawaii, we're blessed with fast, reliable internet. But for example, if we're trying to deliver some training for teachers, which we do a lot of, we can't always put somebody on a plane because we want to provide training over a 12-month period. So we'll do some face-to-face at the beginning and then we'll use technology to follow up later. So we do a lot of online support through webinars and through online resources. There is a challenge with that though. Unfortunately, a lot of places don't have good internet. It's not reliable and it doesn't have great bandwidth. So the technology inside the classroom is really much more meager than you might actually expect, given how close the islands are to other places that have great.
So how much is the annual budget?
You're putting me on the spot, Bill, but I guess because it's public knowledge, then we have to file our 990s, and we've just done that for last year. So it's a smidge over $4 million.
Smidge over. And where does most of it come from?
So when we started in 1990, we were fully US federally government funded.
Okay.
In a way, we're a quasi-government agency.
And the funding came from the U.S.
Department
State
of
Department?
Education.
Department of Education.
Yes, because these areas are affiliated with the US government, it's not the same relationship that they would have, they, as being the State Department, would have with islands in the South Pacific like Fiji or Samoa or the Cook Islands, for example.
Okay.
These are the islands. Hawaii is a state. Guam and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas and American Samoa are territories.
Right.
And the freely associated states are covered under the Compact Agreement, which was set up after the Second World War. So our funding initially started as being fully from the US Department of Education. But over a period of time, our funding has diversified because the US government doesn't have the largesse that it used to have, especially since sequestration. So in the last 5 years, we've really focused on looking at other ways to support our work. So not only do we get some support still from the US Department of Education, but other US federal government agencies that care about what's happening here in Hawaii and in the islands. For example, the National Science Foundation supports a large amount of our work around climate and water security. In addition, we get some support from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences because we do a lot of work with teachers and librarians, for example. But we're also now moving into a new phase, which is where we are trying to increase the amount of support from foundations and from public donations.
So you're really getting into fundraising at this point.
We are, and I think it's an opportunity for people who really care about what's happening in education, but also care about what's happening from an environmental perspective and a cultural perspective, because the work that Prell does pulls all of these threads together and embeds them in all of the strategies that we do with communities.
The foundations that you are making application to, these are U.S. foundations or foundations from other industrialized countries?
So at the moment, we're focusing on US foundations, and in particular focusing on foundations here in Hawaii because they're closely attuned to the needs of the islands. So hopefully we'll get some support from some of the local foundations in the next funding rounds, especially for work that we're doing here in Hawaii. So for example, we have one project at the moment that we're seeking funding from several foundations because it's a large project, so we can't expect any one foundation to assist completely. But it's based in Kalihi, and it's around the watershed in the back of Kalihi, and it's about taking students from the Kalihi schools and taking their teachers and instilling in their teachers a sense of environmental stewardship around science curriculum. And then those teachers, through professional development that we'll support them with over a period of 12 months, will then provide a new lens for project-based learning around the science curriculum. So getting kids excited by taking them outside of the classroom and into the watershed so they can actually learn by doing. And we know that kids learn best when they're actually excited about what they're learning.
Oh, that's so true.
And they get to practice it.
That's so true.
So we're really hoping that that project will get funded here. It's important that we here on Oahu look after our watersheds, and this is a great way to instill that in just not individual teachers and students, but across a whole complex area in Kalihi.
Do you often go visit the offices in the area?
Yes, so it's one of the things that you mentioned earlier about having locally based offices means that we're attuned with the communities, but it's important for the leadership to also be attuned to what's happening.
Sure.
So I travel to the office, to the stakeholders here in Hawaii, which is easy because I'm based here, but I also travel out to the other offices and even where we don't have offices. So I'll be visiting American Samoa later in the year for the first time, which I'm excited about. But it's a reciprocal environment. So not only do we go and gather information about community needs, but we also ask the communities when they're here in Hawaii, as often people do travel through Hawaii onto other places, or we'll bring them in for specific meetings. So we have a program governance council, which is made up of the chief state school officers from each of the regions, including Hawaii, where the chief teacher for
The
each
chief teacher.
chief
Okay.
teacher, in essence, to put it in lay people's terms. We sit down with them over a day and we really dig down into what's working in their education systems, what they'd like to see improved, and then start mapping out a plan about how we can support them through our work or how we can help them find other partners that can support them as well.
Mm. Wow, interesting. You sound very excited about the job, by the way. Yeah, very excited. I sense great enthusiasm.
Thank you. It really is an opportunity to help children in the islands live quality lives at home, but also have the knowledge and the skills that they need so that the world is their oyster. And I think you can't ask for a job better than that gives you opportunity to help with that.
That's great. That's great. So why should an individual support Prell, an individual and organization? I mean, you must get this question as you go around and, write, grants and, send them in. And, I mean, the question, it can be put in a number of ways, but it really comes down to the fact, why should we support you? So what do you typically say?
Do you care about kids? Do you care about their education? Do you care about the environment that they live in these islands? And if you answer yes to all those three questions, then donating $1 to Prell will help make an impact.
Interesting. For an individual investor, if they should make a donation to Prell, is it a tax deduction?
It is. We are a 501c3 non-profit registered in the United States, and donations given to Prell are fully tax deductible.
That's a great incentive right there.
It is a great incentive right there, but it's also an investment. If we create places where children can grow and thrive, then they will contribute to their community as they grow themselves. So if you want to live in a place that's prosperous and that's environmentally safe and that has the resources that you think that it needs, then investing in children's future in a way that educates them to deliver that is something that actually benefits you, not just the communities.
For the college students that might be watching the show today, do you offer internships at Prell?
We do, actually. One of our interns is joining us here today in the studio. We think that it's really important to invest in the professional development of people who have expertise either in a technical area, like, for example, linguists. We've recently hired a linguist, another linguist. And so people who have technical expertise around the education work that we do, but also people who have a deep passion around the Pacific and the islands and around environmental issues.
So if one of our viewers wanted to investigate possible internship opportunities at Prell, they could get on your website or give you a call and get further information.
Absolutely. We actually have a page on our website that gives information about how to apply for internships.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think it's important to get more and more people involved and knowledgeable about the South Pacific, because it seems to me this is an area which, unfortunately, the United States has been kind of hot and cold on. And sometimes it's been very interested, and then sometimes it's showed no interest at all. And it's been hills and valleys. I think Australia and New Zealand probably have a much more solid record of involvement with the area.
I think that the US has a global agenda, and sometimes it's really hard to focus deeply on one place for a long time when there's so many other things happening in the world that requires the attention. And I think we saw that with the pivot or the rebalance to the Asia Pacific. And when we heard about the rebalance, a lot of people thought that that was an opportunity for the US to really re-engage on a deep and sustained level with the Pacific Islands. But what we understand now is that perhaps it's a little bit more big Asia and little P for Pacific in the rebalance, and that the islands themselves, while being incredibly strategically important, aren't the actual focus of that work.
That's a very, very interesting way to put it. Very interesting. How was that? The little P, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I sense that since Kurt Campbell left the State Department, that the U.S. interest in the South Pacific has ebbed a bit. He seemed, when he was there, it was at a pretty high level.
I think, I don't know that I would actually characterize it that way, but I definitely think the profile, I think the interest is still there, but the profile isn't what it was before.
Quite interesting. Quite interesting. What's the #1 project at Prell that you're most proud of?
Oh, there's so many, but I think what...
Oh, you mean it's a hard question?
It is a really hard question, actually, but what that does is give me an opportunity to talk about more than one thing. So what we're doing is integrating different missions into and embedding them across all of the work that we do. So when we talk about that mission of enhancing community well-being, it doesn't matter if we're working on a bilingual children's picture book in Hawaiian language, or a learning garden on the Big Island, or a water catchment project in Chuuk, for example. Because the underlying theme of all of the work that we do is about building a community's self-sustainability, the ability to look after themselves and to have access to food and have access to water and have access to the science knowledge that you need to do those things, but also have access to the languages that you need to know to have those traditional knowledges accessed in a really deep and meaningful way, but also that the resiliency is building in the communities by doing this work. So if we're working on science curriculum or math curriculum or languages or social studies, we pull all of those threads together to make sure that the matchup is building sustainability. So there's not one project, because all of the projects that we work on do that.
Well, let's take another break and we'll come back to that and pursue that a bit further. You're watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Nicole Forrester. She's the president and CEO of Prell. And we've been talking about some of the great work that Prell does in trying to make life in the South Pacific a lot better for the folks there. And we'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Miley Scarpino, and I'm the host of the Empower Hour. If you're interested in health, nutrition, fitness, here on the island of Oahu, want to learn more about places to train at or different trainers available, then watch my show on Fridays at 3. We have a great time, and I hope that you'll come join us. Much aloha. Now go get swole.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Welcome back to Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Nicole Forrester, president and CEO of Prell. And during the break, we got a tweet, and I think we want to address that at this time. Let me see, I'm going to read it for it's on the screen now. I don't need to read it. But I'll read it anyway. Your work sounds fantastic. Do you accept individual or corporate donations?
Well, thank you, Elise, for that question. I really appreciate it. Yes, we do accept both individual and corporate donations, and we're happy to provide the website. I think is going to go on the bottom of the screen. It's prell.org, or you can contact us by phone or by email at info@prell.org. So thank you. We're really willing and able and ready to take donations from both individuals and corporations.
Great. Let me see. So we're talking about the exemplary project, and it's sort of like, if I understood you right, it's sort of taking a program and making sure that it's linked up, achieving its goals in all the areas that you serve.
Yes.
Okay, good, good. How do you evaluate programs? I mean, sometimes every organization, gets programs, and well, realistically speaking, some really don't measure up. They don't quite meet expectations and they have to be dropped. But what's your criterion for deciding whether a program is really meeting its objectives or not?
So program evaluation is incredibly important, and we have a multifaceted approach because you can't rely on one way to evaluate. So some organizations evaluate their success on getting refunded. That's one measure of success. We have that, but we also have what we call internal evaluations. So we look at what were the goals of the program that we set out to start with. Did we achieve those goals? Were there any barriers or challenges? What did we do to overcome them? We also have, as required by our funders, external independent evaluators, and I find their evaluations the most...
Who are they?
So there are professional evaluators who, some of them reside in Hawaii, some of them reside on the mainland, who are trained in the science of evaluation. And so they are actually, we're required by our funders to pay for an external evaluator to go and evaluate the programs to see whether or not we were successful. The great thing about external evaluations is that they're independent and they're very transparent. So when we are able to point to an external evaluation and say, we achieved increased science knowledge in 4th grade students in the Kalihi Valley, for example, if we get that project funded, then that's an independent voice saying, not only did we do what we said we were going to do with the delivery of the actual work, but we actually achieved the outcome that we were set after, and that's the big thing. You can deliver a program and it can be done in a way that you meet all of the transparency and the accountability that's required by your funders and still not hit your impact or your outcome. For us, that's the most important part.
Interesting, interesting. These evaluators, these are professional educators?
Some of them come from the education field, but some of them come from a research evaluation background. So they're not specifically educators, but they're PhDs in the art of education or in the science of education, in evaluation.
I guess everybody knows this every once in a while you have to close a project down.
Yes, sometimes you don't get renewed funding because the funders' priorities change, or sometimes programs don't deliver the way that you thought that they would when you designed them with the community that you're working with. But most importantly, you close programs down when the community no longer needs them. The great way is because the community is then taking the program and owning it for themselves. And we're really lucky that some of our programs have actually gone on to that self-sustaining way, that the communities themselves say, Prell, we don't need you to deliver this for us anymore. We've got those skills and now we can deliver the programs ourselves.
And they've developed their own funding sources. That's a highly successful program in anybody's book,
yes.
in any nonprofit organization. That's what you shoot for.
Exactly. So I always tell funders that I'm actually trying to do Prell out of business in the long run, because if we're successful, we'll build the capacities of the communities that we work with and they'll no longer need us.
That's so true. That is so true. Do you have any new programs that are kind of in the planning stage right now that you are incubating and that you hope to put into operation?
We do. We have some programs.
Or is that a state secret?
No, not at all. And everything that we do is available to the public because we want to share the knowledge that we're creating with communities, because we don't own it, the communities own it. So anytime that we come up with a great idea, we'll put it up on our website, we'll give it to the communities to disseminate amongst themselves. We were just in DC last week actually sharing some of our work with educators from the mainland, but also from the Atlantic and Caribbean islands at the US ED. And so because they have island challenges and strengths like we do.
There must be a lot of similarities.
Yeah, there are.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, it occurred to me, the Peace Corps. I think the Peace Corps is in Micronesia and Marshall Islands. Do you work with them?
We do. We partner with just about everybody that cares about education we'll partner with, and that's the great thing about these professional learning communities. For example, on the climate education project, we have over 100 partners, because if we're in a place and somebody else is there working on similar issues, we want to know what they're doing so we can collaborate with them, so that we don't overlap with their work or replicate their work, so that instead we actually build the strength of the communities together. So there's no ego or ownership about this kind of work. You have to be side by side with other people who are doing the same work as you. I know that in the Marshall Islands, the Peace Corps have been away for a while, but they're interested in having them come back. There are so many organisations in the region who really care about education and care about the islands, and it's a great thing because we all bring a different expertise. Prell's expertise is around strengthening education systems and strategies and doing it across a spectrum, not just with the principals and the education departments, but with the teachers, with the parents, with the communities. And now this newer piece that we're adding in is with other service providers and other NGOs.
Interesting. Actually, we talked about the fact that this is such a very collective effort. It involves everybody. How about some other organizations, like right here in Hawaii, the East-West Center? Do you have any interface with them that assist you?
Bill, actually, I'm an alumni of the Asia Pacific Leadership Program at the East-West Center.
Okay.
And two of the Prell, Honolulu-based Prell team are also alumni of the East-West Center's APLP program.
Oh, so there's a lot of interface there.
There's a lot of interface, not just on a professional level, but on a personal level. And in Hawaii, it's important that we really harness the strength of the local knowledge, and we work really closely with several of the other nonprofits who care not just about the environment, but also about education. So we're really lucky to do that.
We're coming down here fairly close to the end. Let me be sure to get this question in. Does Prell's work support the U.S. rebalanced Asia, the Asia-Pacific region?
Wow, Bill, that's a great question. And I have to say, it does. So putting my old
Foreign Service
officer
cap on.
Officer cap on, creating sustainable, stable communities in the Pacific will ameliorate a strategic vacuum that could appear if the US, Australia, New Zealand don't provide the kind of support that they need to the islands, which could be filled by other players in the region that are looking to increase their influence in these very strategic geographic positions of the islands.
And there certainly there is one of those at least.
Well, not just one. I think that there's several players who are interested in making sure that they have access to the Pacific that's unfettered. Now, at the moment, the only country in the world that really has that access is the US. And by Prell supporting islands which are sustainable and educated and thriving, that they're not reliant on external influences for their well-being. And so they will make choices that are knowledgeable and informed about the best interests of their place. The Compact Agreement that covers the freely associated states is going to change in its nature after 2023. At that point in time, the historical link that the US has had providing money in return for strategic access will shift. So that's not very far down the track. If we can help support communities to be in a much stronger place by 2023, then that strategic vacuum is much less threat.
So what you're saying is after 2023, the U.S. will render less financial support to these areas?
Yes.
And so they will be more on their own?
Yes, in a way.
Okay.
Yeah, so they will have to have strategies for their own economic development in a way that they haven't had before, and economic development is linked to educational outcomes.
Great. Thanks for joining us. You gave us a lot to think about, and I think our audience will appreciate knowing about Prell and the great work it's doing. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.